Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to move along into our special focus of the day, and we're going to split that in half. We have our two speakers here today, and we'll take a break in between just to give everybody a quick opportunity to refresh themselves. But our special focus for today is water infrastructure and the services that accompany those things. And I first came in contact with the concepts of water infrastructure, asset inventories, and asset management about 12 years ago when I started with the Act 167 Stormwater Management Program with the Commonwealth out of our DEP office in Meadville. And what that program did was it worked with counties and municipalities to get into place not only the policy structure, but also an evaluation of how they manage stormwater and the infrastructure in which they use to do that. And what came out of that was very clear to me, was that in a lot of cases, the management of the infrastructure was disjointed. Many municipalities didn't even know what they had in the ground. And they weren't entirely sure how much it would cost if they ever needed to replace it. And so there was minimal planning going on, and almost no cooperation between municipalities. These were municipalities who were neighboring, who shared common stormwater management problems, who shared the problem of a lack of capacity inside of their individual organizations, and they weren't cooperating with each other. And so coming out of this process where I worked with 12 counties and it was 390 municipalities, I took away that there definitely is an opportunity for cooperation on the municipal level and then also on the county level as a coordinating entity. Now fast forward to 2017, and I'm in the position now in the Office of the Great Lakes for DEP, and I'm working, I'm a Pennsylvania commissioner to the Great Lakes Commission, and I found out that the commission had a planning exercise going on. And out of that planning exercise came a document. It was the Joint Action Plan for Clean Water, Infrastructure, and Services. And inside of that, it was almost alarming. It was alarming. What happened was I found out what the needs and the gaps of the Great Lakes region were in terms of drinking water, wastewater, and stormwater infrastructure. And out of that, the EPA estimates for Pennsylvania showed that we were underinvesting in our water infrastructure at $1.1 billion annually. And that we had an overall gap between the revenue that our systems bring in compared to their liabilities for operation and maintenance and replacement of their infrastructure at approximately $22.7 billion over the next 20 years. Well, as I started digging into the resources and citations inside of the Joint Action Plan, I found a 2015 DEP document that we had put together. It was a gap analysis. And inside of that was a less charming picture of this. In fact, it was worse off. And they estimated during that study that in Pennsylvania, the as-is gap at 10 years is $10.2 billion for drinking water, and $8.4 billion, plus or minus $2 billion, for wastewater. So that's $20 billion in the next 10 years. How are we going to go about beginning to get our arms around this problem? Well, one of the situations with any problem that you have is you have to take an objective look at it and basically take an inventory. And in this case, these systems, the very first thing they would want to do is to do an inventory of their assets, what they have underneath the ground, what are their treatment procedures, and those types of aspects. And so as I started looking at asset management, I stumbled upon a 2004 U.S. Government Accountability Office paper. It was long and it was good. And it brought up to me some of the things that go along with drinking water and wastewater and some statistics. And I'll read some of these off to you, and that'll preface and transition into our speaker. So in terms of asset management, whether or not these systems know what's in the ground, how much it costs, how much it's going to cost to replace, how long it's going to last, and when they need to replace it. That many systems don't even charge enough to cover the full cost of service. 29% of drinking water systems and 41% of wastewater systems are annually running a deficit and running debt. They don't even cover the cost of service. 33% of utilities deferred maintenance last year. 33% deferred minor and major capital improvement projects, and 1/5, 20%, deferred the cost of all three. Only 40% of drinking water utilities and 35% of wastewater utilities met or exceeded their pipeline replacements inside of their systems. And a full 50% repaired less than 1%, replaced less than 1% of their collection or distribution systems. 1/3 of these systems don't have any asset management, which means they don't have anything written down. They don't even know what's under the ground, let alone how much it's going to cost to replace over the long term and whether their rates actively reflect replacing that. And that most of the ones that did have asset management, those plans were inadequate or incomplete. And so what I want to do here is start a community discussion, especially in Erie, because if you can argue that our place in the world on the Great Lakes, we are so intertwined with the water resources here and dependent upon them for our livelihoods, that this is the place where it should start. That conversation should start in the Commonwealth. We would depend upon it for our industries, clean and adequate supplies for our industries, for our residents, and we are very dependent upon it for our recreational, our tourism dollars, and our fishing, the people who come here to fish on an annual basis. So this is where the conversation can start, and we also have a lot of resources available to us. It's not only those resources that are here in the state, but because we are on the Great Lakes, it makes us part of a larger community that has a lot of capacity, who have a lot of municipalities, a lot of urban regions that are just like Erie. And so we have an opportunity to learn as well as kind of lead the way. So with that, what I'd like to do is I'd like to introduce Ms. Victoria Pebbles from the Great Lakes Commission. Victoria is a program manager with the Commission where she facilitates a multidisciplinary project team or teams to address complex ecological and socioeconomic challenges facing the Great Lakes region. She currently leads the Commission's water quality and water infrastructure programs to address the water quality issues in urban, rural, watershed-wide settings and help deliver clean water infrastructure and services that support a safe and sustainable water supply across the region. Ms. Pebbles holds an MS from a master's degree from the University of Michigan and an environmental leadership certificate from UC Berkeley. Victoria has held previous positions with the University of Michigan, the U.S. Senate, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, and over the last 25 years, she has published dozens of articles and reports, delivered copious presentations, I will attest to that, and served on numerous advisory groups addressing environmental policy, science, and management. And it is my pleasure to welcome Victoria Pebbles here to talk about clean water infrastructure in the Great Lakes region, the challenges and opportunities. Victoria.
Thank you, Tim. So I'm going to dive right in, and I'll back up in a couple of slides and tell you a little bit more about me. But first, why clean water? So why do we call it clean water? Why don't we just call it water infrastructure? And so some of you may work on the wastewater side, or some of you may work on the drinking water side. But if you're familiar with the federal and the state statutes that govern how we manage water, those are really separated. We have a Safe Drinking Water Act for the drinking water side of things, and we have an act called the Clean Water Act that deals with the clean water sides of things, which is really after we use it, we flush it, and we don't really want to deal with it anymore. But the reality is, there's just one drop of water. It's not the drop of water that, despite our efforts to engineer and separate them, Mother Nature didn't say, okay, now you are herefore knighted as the stormwater drop of water. You are no longer drinking water. That same drop of water, there's one hydrologic cycle, as we learned in like 8th grade or 7th grade. It doesn't change. So we're facing right now a crisis where we've been trying to trying to force Mother Nature, or the natural hydrologic cycle, if you will, to fit our worldview of our regulatory and our statutes to have these separate systems. So that's why the clean water. So when I say clean, it doesn't mean just the storm water or what goes into wastewater treatment plants. I'm talking about drinking water, storm water, wastewater. And then why services? So on the way over, I took a lift from the hotel where I was staying, and she said, oh, what are you going to talk about today? And I said, well, water infrastructure. She said, well, what do you mean by that? And we were driving along the road, and I said, see those little holes in the curb? Those little dark spots where the snow's melting, it goes in there. That's a storm sewer. She goes, well, what does that mean? What does that do? And I said, well, that takes the water. So for driving here today, in spring, there's a lot of flooding that happens, especially after warm weather and piles of snow melting at the same time. We've all experienced that living in this region. She's like, oh, okay. I said, well, she goes, well, I grew up in the country and we didn't have those. And I said, right. Because nature provided that service for free. You had land and just water fell, and where it fell, it sort of filtered into the ground, So we're now having to pay for things that otherwise we didn't have to pay for, that were free. And that's okay. I mean, we do that to provide services because we live in a civil society. We bring people together in concentrated areas to provide jobs and education for our children. But we have to understand there are consequences. And so now I left her with the cool thought of, I said, well, when you drive over a pothole, you notice it, don't you? She said, of course I do. And I said, but who drives over the clog in their stormwater system? Who calls their county commissioner, their state representative, and says, I have a problem with my asset management. It's ruining my rims on my car. Because it's invisible, nobody really sees it. So I think the discussion today is part of a discussion that Tim started thinking about many years ago, and I'm hoping to, inspire you to have more of that conversation, to peek below the surface and know what's going on in your community and how you can be part of that conversation to elevate solutions. I think I need to move a slide forward here. Okay, so a little bit more about me. As Tim mentioned, I've been with the Great Lakes Commission for 25 years. I originally hailed from the West Coast in Northern California, and I have a passion for large-scale ecosystems. So I'm always looking and learning what's going on in different parts of the country. We look a lot at Chesapeake Bay, the Gulf of Mexico, Gulf of Maine, and these shared waters that we enjoy and share with our neighbors and our friends to the north in Canada. So the commission, the Great Lakes Commission, is binational. It's 8 states and 2 provinces that touch one or more of the Great Lakes. And I'm really happy, not only is Tim one of my commissioners, but Sister Pat Lupo in the audience is also another commissioner. And I've worked with many of you over the years, Dave Skelly and others for many years. It's probably my 15th time in Erie, and always love coming back here. I think I spoke with some of you at the Jefferson Educational Society a couple of years ago. You might have seen a couple of nodding heads here. And we partner with Sea Grant. We host a Sea Grant Fellow in our office every year. And so we work with a lot of regional institutions. It's not work that we do alone. Our work is very much predicated on building partnerships and networks. So now what am I here to talk about? I'm here to talk about this thing called a joint action plan. Now you understand why I put the word services and why it's clean water in there. So the impetus came because we had several resolutions. The Great Lakes Commission does its formal policy statement by passing a resolution. And we do that where the 8 states and 2 provinces agree on something. So we had one that was related to dealing with stormwater problems and green infrastructure. We had another one dealing with, we need more funding for both the drinking water and the clean water or the stormwater SRF programs. And then there was the Flint Crisis, and it was like, we need to do more about dealing with lead service lines and how do we deal with the federal lead and copper rule. So the series of kind of sort of, I would say, separated resolutions that were calling on Congress to kind of do something about it. But then our commissioner said, we as the states and on the state side, and even it's the same in Ontario and Quebec, there's a lot of authority that happens at the state level. The Clean Water Act and the State Drinking Water, they're delegated, so it means that people at the state level really call most of the shots. It's not the feds. They sort of set the minimum threshold for what must be done to protect human health. But the state said, let's come together and do a report that really says, what can we do? We can't always count on the federal government to come and give us more money. Yeah, we'd like that. but how can we help address this problem? So we passed a resolution that called for a working group, and that working group was set up in the early part of 2017, and we had representatives from Ohio, Michigan, Illinois, Pennsylvania. Jay Patel from Pennsylvania DEP was on our work group, and Ontario. So we did a literature review. First we started, so what's out there? And we interviewed more than 50 documents. One of them was the 2015 report on the gap analysis that Department of Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection did. I'm used to acronyms, that Tim alluded to in his opening remarks. And so we wanted to understand what's the state of play and how can we build on that. We didn't want to just write another report that was going to sit on a shelf. So if some of you have read it maybe in advance, I have a couple of hard copies with me today, and I will provide a link at the end of my presentation. So what did we find? We looked at the analysis at the current state of clean water infrastructure and services. When you see CWIS, that's the acronym for that one water approach, drinking, storm, and wastewater. Both the pumps and the pipes, as well as the services and the resources that go into building those pumps and pipes and maintaining them, and the other services that are provided. So we did pass this joint action plan was adopted by the Commission in September 2017, so not too long ago, as Tim said. I'm just going to walk you through what was in that report, just some highlights here. So,
Can you move that up just a little bit so it picks up your voice? There you go. I think that might be better.
is this better? So on the drinking water side and on the U.S. side, the U.S. EPA does these surveys, and they ask the states periodically to say, tell us what your needs are for drinking water and tell us what your needs are for wastewater. And those are two separate surveys. And so the latest one that went into the data you see here was 2013 for the drinking water side, and 2016 was the last survey for the wastewater side of things. In Canada, similar, they had a infrastructure report card from 2016. So some of this data is a few years old. But the interesting thing is, some of the drinking waters, it really only represented about 6% of the total drinking water suppliers across our region. So it's not really robust data. So that was a first sort of red flag. We're like, whoa, what story can we tell? Because we're really going to tell a story based on 6% of the providers. So I'm going to say this, and I'll say it again. You can't manage what you don't measure. So if we're only talking to 6% of the folks, we're not really getting a full picture of what's going on. And that's really really rings true with asset management, which I'll talk about a little later. So we tried to get additional information from the states and provinces where they had it and bring that into this picture. And if you read the appendix, it'll tell you more about the data and how we came up with the numbers here. So you can look at the numbers on the screen. I'm not going to read them out. They're big. But I think a key thing that everybody agreed to on the working group was that they're still woefully underestimated. So even these big numbers don't really capture the true need because, for example, it doesn't count for things like fire suppression. Communities need fire suppression. Lead service line replacement, which has become a really important issue after the Flint water crisis and many parts of the Midwest and the Northeast where we still have lead service lines. It also doesn't count for things like population growth. So we ended up doing a methodology that we defend in our report, but one of the key things is there's just not adequate data to truly understand where we are, which was a key factor leading to our recommendation around asset management. Are people having trouble hearing me?
No, it's a little static, that's all.
Good. It's good now. You moved that thing. It sounds better now.
Thanks. So this focuses on the U.S. side. We're on the U.S. So there was a report that was done, and it looked at clean water and drinking water. These are the state revolving funds. They're money that are given to the states, and states use them to capitalize investments in both the drinking water and the wastewater side of things from the 70s. And you see the peak here in this, let me see if I can do this. In the 70s, who remembers the construction grants phase? Raise hands. Ooh, okay, I'm dating myself now. So back in the day, the federal government actually used to give money to communities to build their drinking water plants and their wastewater plants. And after they thought they'd finished that job, they said, okay, we're done giving money out. We're just going to give you money to rotate, in a rotating fund, or they call it a revolving fund. And you manage that at the state level. So then you see this sort of precipitous decline after the 70s. It's just kind of like been pretty stable. There's a little adjustment. That the blue line is the 2014 adjustment for inflation, and the goldish line is actual dollars. So I think the takeaway here is it stayed pretty much the same. There was a spike in 2009, and that was the American Recovery and the ERA and Recovery and Renewal Act, but pretty much it stayed stable. Well, that may not seem like a problem, except that there was a backlog of need. Things are breaking down, and the more you let things break down, the more expensive it is to fix them. Think about your house. If you have like a wooden framed house and you need to paint it, it's way easier to paint it if it's like 5 years old and the painting versus you waiting 15 or 20 years and it's really, really bad. It's the same thing with our pipes and our infrastructure. So the longer we've delayed this investment, the greater the need grows. And I'll show you another chart, one from the report as well, that kind of shows how that investment gap has been growing, so the need's actually growing over time. What's also not shown here is some of you may have heard that Congress passed in 2016 a credit assistance program called WIFIA. It's really to deal with credit assistance for very large infrastructure projects. And so what there's a challenge is there's a mismatch of capacity between a lot of smaller communities that have been handling this on their own. They can't compete for these large dollars. They have to come in and play with bigger systems and bigger communities. They actually haven't even given any money out on this program yet, but there are 12 projects that are queued up to get the money and start doing stuff this year. So in the Joint Action Plan, so I talked about the decrease in federal funding. These are my talking points. I think lack of long-term planning, so the upgrades and replacement. And some of these infrastructure actually hit the end of their natural lifespan. They're not built to last 100 years. And then there's also increasing pressure from climate change, increasing intensity and frequency of storms, as well as when there's demographic growth and change. You have more people move into an area and they're putting more pressure on these systems. So it's a combination of effects that puts more strain on them, and then they get older and start to break down more quickly, or at least not provide the services we're expecting them to provide. So yeah, there is a lack of comprehensive inventory and asset management. So this is a key graphic. We kind of took one that was done by a group called the U.S. Water Lines for the nation, and we did one just looking at the 8 states and 2 provinces across the region. And what's really illuminating about this one is you can see the investment gap. So again, the funding is pretty stable, the orange, just like the previous slide. It's about the same, goes down a little bit in real dollars. But the gap, the needs, look how much they go up. And it's almost exponential. I'm not a math major, but that's a pretty rapid increase because there's a backlog and it costs more. The more you delay it, the more costly it becomes. So the other thing we did, because it's really hard to go to anybody who holds purse strings and say, we need more money for something, because the conversation quickly becomes, tell me how many jobs this is providing for. Tell me how many industries this is providing. So we said, we're going to anticipate that question and do some homework. I'm really happy to say that some of the research that we built these graphics on was done by Sea Grant. So we looked at different industries across the region. I'm not going to go into all the details, but you can see there's agriculture, manufacturing, mining, tourism and recreation, transportation and warehouse, science and engineering, and then utilities. So manufacturing, it's probably no surprise to any of you, is the one in orange, and it's the largest one in our Midwestern region, and that's been a consistent economic driver for many, many years. In fact, our region was founded on a strong manufacturing base. But you can see they're not alone, there are other sectors supporting this. And then we also, in the graphic on the right, broke it down to the types of, the number of jobs on these water-dependent industries and the percentage of total employment related to those jobs. So in Appendix B of the report, if you want more details on how we came up with these figures, I will direct you there. Or if you still have questions, contact me and we can look at the background information. I was speaking with someone before my talk and just saying that we tried to design this so it would be readable for our commissioners, even at 20-something pages. It's kind of long, but there are volumes of information behind it. So in the Joint Action Plan, there are actually 17 recommendations, and I'm boiling them down to 6, kind of at the executive level for the presentation here, in the interest of time. But what I wanted to say is that these recommendations were really designed to be, again, looking at what can the states and the provinces do. We didn't want it to be all about, here Congress, here federal government, come fix our problem. We recognize it's a shared problem. Absolutely, the federal government has a role and should have a role. And so there are a few recommendations that are targeted at the federal level. There are also some recommendations targeted at the local level. For example, municipal drinking water facilities, they're the ones who set rates. They determine whether how much ratepayer pays for their drinking water, and rates are a problem. And I will say that hopefully you can take away from this talk that if you think rates are too high for drinking water, then asset management is one way to help with that. Because you can't, if you don't have good assets, you don't understand how to understand what the needs are and how to finance them properly over time, then you're caught behind the 8 ball, constantly trying to play financial catch-up, and then it falls on the backs of the ratepayers. So they are related. Now, as a Great Lakes Commission, our member states and provinces didn't really want to get into the water affordability. They're like, that's the purview of local drinking water and wastewater facilities, the operations. But they do have the ability to sort of create enabling conditions. And so asset management was an area where we, as a Great Lakes Commission, could help empower the states and the provinces to really create those enabling conditions, create ways in which the state can help local facilities manage, do inventories, and manage what they have more efficiently. So our 17 recommendations, I think those 6 categories are, the first one is embracing this one water approach. There were reasons back in the day why we separated out drinking water from wastewater, but it's becoming increasingly inefficient to have 2 separate departments with separate missions, separate mandates, separate pools of funding, especially when every one of the Great Lakes states is a home rule state, meaning that the authority for decision making falls at the smallest level of government, like towns and townships and villages. And so if you have to have small units of government managing multiple departments, that's a lot of administrative overhead. But the solution isn't only to put them under one building, it's actually to get them to think about these systems as part of a whole. How can I, as the drinking water, if I'm reducing my burden, if I'm increasing the quality of the water that's coming out of my wastewater treatment plant, putting less gunk in the lake, so to speak, then I'm putting less pressure on the drinking water plant to treat that stuff. Because remember, it's all the same drop of water. So I think there are efficiencies to be gained in changing sort of the thinking about water infrastructure as part of one. And the second one is really about the heart of what Tim was talking about, this idea about asset inventories. When we started looking at what the states and the provinces are doing in this space, we learned that it's a patchwork. Some states require it, but maybe they only do it on the drinking water side, or they only do it on the wastewater side. Some have guidance, they're suggesting it, they'd like it to happen, and they might have an incentive or 2 out there, but it's really a patchwork. And then there's not a consistent approach. US EPA has an asset management tool online, but it's really more geared toward big systems. What about all the smaller communities, of which there are thousands in the Great Lakes region? What do? They don't even have staff to know how to do an asset management. They're trying to deal with fires and put out emergency issues. So many of these locations are facing a crisis. They're dealing with crises every day, and asset management feels like a planning thing. It's just out there, we need to plan, but who has time to plan when you're trying to deal with emergencies like people suffering from lead poisoning or cyanobacteria getting into your drinking water supply? So What we decided to do is think about this area where the Great Lakes Commission can kind of try to move the dialogue forward. And I'll talk about that in a minute because this was the one that we're moving next steps on. But in the meantime, what are the other things that the plan called for? We called for promoting regional water authorities, or at least opportunities to aggregate services. Again, it doesn't have to be under the same building, that's not the solution itself, but can we maximize efficiencies by sharing resources and tools and techniques for managing water? Looking at public and private partnerships, this one is a little controversial. Some people think it's this best thing since sliced bread, let the private sector help pay for it, but there are concerns about the private sector really having the interests of the public at hand, and how do you keep rates low if you're a private utility? And I know there are private utilities in Pennsylvania, there are some in our other Great Lakes states, and I think that the answer right now is the jury's still out. But I would just say our recommendation was to explore these, to look at them more, to see how well they're performing, and I think it's also, we're learning that it depends on how those partnerships are structured. Funding allocations, state and provincial, this goes to the SRF programs, that's been there forever. We still need to have increased allocations for funding, and I think the recent budget that was just signed does do that for this year, so that was a good thing to learn the other day. Enabling conditions, I mentioned this earlier. Again, we didn't want to tell local utilities how to manage, because that's not what the states want to do. They want to respect the local authority, but can we get out of the way? Can we create those conditions that allow local utilities, whether it's the drinking water or the wastewater side, to do their job better, to coordinate with one another, and to use new tools and techniques that can address affordability issues? Because the tradition has been that if you have operation and maintenance needs, you need to fix the pipes and the pumps. How do you do that? You raise your revenue by raising your rates. That system is not sustainable. And it's especially difficult when water has been virtually free for most of the people in the Great Lakes region's lifetimes. So the next steps, I mentioned previously that gap analysis we did was built off of a report that the U.S. Water Alliance did, so we kind of took that and did it for the Great Lakes region, and then just a couple weeks ago, that same organization quoted our joint action plan over 10 times in a report that they released about an equitable water future. Again, I mentioned our states and provincial leaders were not really interested in tackling the affordability issue, but we were able to frame and provide data out there regionally that allowed another organization to take that information and advance a piece of it that we weren't well positioned to do. So I want you to think about that. It's not just the recommendations, and there aren't uniform for every entity. Some of them are more targeted to be pursued by certain groups, and others are better pursued by others. Another one is in the state of Michigan. About 2 years ago, Michigan's Governor Snyder commissioned a 21st Century Infrastructure Commission. And what he wanted to do is look at all infrastructure: telecom, roads, airports, water ports, water infrastructure, and say, can you help me to better understand the suite of infrastructure that government provides for the citizens of Michigan, and how we can build efficiencies across all infrastructure. How many of you have seen the American Society of Civil Engineers infrastructure report cards? Okay, so they do that on a national level, and the governor of Michigan wanted to had this blue ribbon commission and said, well, let me do my own investigation. So one of the things they came out with was actually a recommendation to do asset inventory. But what then they said, okay, do asset inventory so we can better manage our assets. Well, how do we do that? And so they have a pilot right now that's looking at integrating water and transportation, just those two sectors. What are the tools? What are the obstacles? One of the early findings is what I just said, that many of the folks that would be or should be doing asset management at the local level don't have the time. They're too busy putting out fires or dealing with crises. They're small communities, they have limited budgets, they don't have high-powered consultants or they need to hire an outside planning or consulting firm to do this kind of stuff for them. Secondly, there isn't like one tool out there, one Excel spreadsheet or one form that everybody agrees is the way to do this. So there are obstacles. So they were piloting that, but we're looking closely at that as we at the Great Lakes Commission now are looking to try to take that information as well as things that have been done in Pennsylvania and elsewhere to say how can we come together around a common suite of tools and techniques. What does it really mean to do this? How do we deal with the rural-urban issue, with the lack of capacity? Is it really that we just are missing a tool, or is it really that we need to train people? And what other tools and techniques are out there? So just a couple weeks ago, actually, the Great Lakes Commission passed an action item, and we will be digging in on this and working with our member states to try to identify what those obstacles are, the real obstacles, so that we can design some solutions that can be scalable at the regional level. Again, because the philosophy is you can't manage what you don't measure. So asset management may sound like this kind of wonky idea, but we all have asset management. At home, we make shopping lists. We know when we're getting low on toilet paper. We wouldn't ever let ourselves run out, right? The janitor knows when to put toilet paper or paper towels in the restrooms. That's an asset. You plan, and it's sort of silly when you think about if we do that at such a basic level in our lives on a day-to-day basis, why would we at the level of government not take this on to provide something as essential as water? So thank you. I really appreciate being here again in Erie. I'll be back again actually in about a month and a half for the Annex 4 subcommittee meeting, talking with folks about HABs, but I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
I think, did you say you spoke at Jefferson?
I did a couple of years ago.
I didn't get to that, but at that point, were you talking regionalization of assets at that time, or?
No, my talk then was about wind energy.
Okay, so how would you suggest getting the conversation started in Erie about, I mean, I can tell you right now, we'll be like, oh my God, regional assets, but I think it's something that needs to be talked about. Would you facilitate that, or who would facilitate something like that? And is it happening in other municipalities or counties in the Great Lakes?
So I mentioned,
kind of two questions.
yeah.
How
So
do we do it?
I mentioned that it is happening in some. It's very uneven, and so one of what I mentioned Michigan by way of example.
Okay.
I don't know exactly everywhere it's happening. When part of the action item that the Great Lakes Commission adopted last month was for us to conduct a series of focus groups.
Okay.
So with your invitation, I would love to come back here and facilitate that conversation. And if you think words do matter, so if you think the word regional is going to be a showstopper for some, think about another way, inter-community conversation. I mean, it's not about one region, is the ring that rules them all. It's really about how do we come together and be better as a collective than we can be as individuals. And so it may not be the same for every community or every region, so to speak. What's great for the Erie region may not be the same for Cleveland or Grand Rapids. So I think the focus groups will really allow us to help facilitate those conversations and hear from you about what your constraints are, what you see as your opportunities, and then sort of try to bring those together and see if we can't find some commonalities across the region.
Thank you.
In the various forums that you've presented the action plan, how has it been received? You see a lot of head nodding. You hear people say they feel overwhelmed by this. What's been the feedback that you've received?
I haven't done that many presentations on it yet. So I did one before our commissioners, and they liked it because they passed a resolution, and we had a couple of panelists, including the head of EPA's Office of Infrastructure Finance, and a panel talking about how important this was because you can't really disaggregate the financing piece, and so people want to dig right in and say, we just need more money. But I think because we're saying we need more money for what, and how do we use the money we have in a smarter way, asset management is one way toward that end. And so from the people I have spoken with, it's been very well received. But this is about my third talk on it. But I will say that the fact that this Water Alliance report quoted it like over 10 times and they only had 20 references and half of them were our report, that seemed like it was well received. Sean?
Yeah, my client recently presented in Youngstown Regional Council of Governments on stormwater management and as well as asset management, combining those two items. But the key presenter from Wolbert, his mantra was running into failure. And it matches up real nicely with your statement that you can't measure what you can't manage what you don't measure. And that's exactly what his point was as well, is that we run it to failure because then we know it broke.
Yeah,
and now we know now we have to repair something.
And that's that spike, right, in the blue on the graph, because we keep deferring these improvements, the maintenance and improvements, and it gets more and more expensive. I think maybe I used the house analogy, but a better one might be your car, right? Because there's certain things, if you fix them right away, you can kind of nip it in the bud and stop the cost from escalating, but if you keep letting it go, it impacts other functionality of the car. Next thing you know, your old motor blows and your car's gone.
He uses that same exact analogy. You don't buy a car and then not change the oil.
Right.
You want that asset to serve you a longer period of time, so we maintain it.
But it's an invisible asset, right? It's one that people don't often see until you hear about a major crisis like Toledo with the cyanobacteria, the toxin getting into the water supply there. So that's a big challenge.
One question I had was, we talked about repairing and running systems into the ground and everything else, and maybe I missed it, but I didn't see anything on there on your presentation where you mentioned anything where the constraints and the cost of DEP regulations changing and affecting the cost of running systems either. Was that figured into your?
So no. So you're I think in your question, you're implied in your question is that regulation increases costs.
Absolutely.
Yeah, a lot.
So I think it's important to look at regulation and think about what are the costs and the benefits. So if we didn't have regulation, we might have a lot of sick or dead people. So we need to have some standards. But I think on the other extreme, there's cases where regulation can be inefficient, or it can be not managed well or be too costly. And this did not do an evaluation and assessment of the regulatory environment, but I think that can be put on the table, right? So what is the proper level of regulation? We want to protect human health and the environment, but how can we make it more efficient? And I would actually argue that asset management is one way to do that, because how do we know how much we need to regulate or not until we really understand what our assets are?
But that's what I'm getting at, is we talk about knowing what's in our system, knowing what's underground, what we have, where it's at, what we got to do to it, but nothing is being addressed as to what other costs are involved in that, like regulations. I mean, we have the RTCR out that is going to cost utilities more money, water utilities, and that's something was not factored into that asset management as well.
Yeah, that could be part of the focus groups. I will say when the states deliver their needs to the US EPA, the US EPA just says, give us what you think you need. And so I think part of the thing that we would want to do is sort of dig in and say, okay, Illinois, when you gave EPA your information, did you factor in the costs of the administrative oversight of your programs, right? So that's a fair question.
I'm Amy Murdoch with Erie County Planning, and we are working with municipalities on stormwater. And I just want to say, you had mentioned, the thousands of small communities with challenges in doing this work, and I think that's a really, really critical piece of this conversation and moving that forward. And understanding that, within the Lake Erie watershed, just in Erie County, we have 23 different municipalities, all with varying challenges and strengths. And I think to really be able to move that conversation forward, recognizing what their true challenges are, spending a lot of time with the municipalities and the owners
Well, I look forward to you helping. I don't know how many hours I can spend, but if some folks like you can do some pre-work with those conversations, and then we can kind of build on those together, I'd welcome that opportunity.
Excellent. Thank you, Victoria. Christine Weigle, she's the executive manager of the Lycoming County Water and Sewer Authority. And this is a very interesting authority because it's done on the county level. It's independent operating authority uniquely created by the Lycoming County Commissioners to serve multiple municipalities without limitations in municipal boundaries. Ms. Weigle has over 25 years experience in both private industry and municipal government with extensive time spent in environmental compliance, engineering, construction, project management, maintenance, safety and health, group facilitation, and strategic planning. The Lycoming County Water and Sewer Authority and Ms. Weigle seek practical, sustainable solutions in today's complex environmental business world to achieve compliance requirements and meet community needs. And just to give you an idea of some of her background, she is a graduate of the Pennsylvania State University in University Park with a Bachelor of Science in Agricultural and Biological Engineering, as well as other certifications through other entities. And so I present to you Christine Weigle.
Thank you, Tim. Hopefully I don't get too much feedback. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak at the PA Lake Erie Environmental Forum. It's a great opportunity as well for me to learn, and I have actually read the action plan 3 times, seeking different thoughts and different ideas out of it for me to use in my day-to-day work that I do. In addition to my background, I'd like to say that I'm also from southwestern PA. I grew up in Westmoreland County. So I spent the 70s in Pennsylvania, and I understand environmental issues from a day-to-day perspective as well as in my business world. I ended up in Lycoming County back in 1993, so I've spent quite a bit of time now in central Pennsylvania. I figured the first question most people would ask is, where in the world is Lycoming County? We are in central Pennsylvania in the heart of the Chesapeake Bay watershed. So a lot of the issues related to nutrients and nutrient reduction really do apply to our environmental world as well. And I wanted to take the opportunity to look at some of the differences or similarities associated between Erie County and Lycoming County. And there's a couple on here that I'll touch on. Obviously, our population is much smaller than Erie County. Our land area is greater, but on population per square mile, we're only just under 100 people per square mile, and Erie is at 351. This is census data, so if I pulled information improperly or if the U.S. Census data is wrong, which sometimes they are, I apologize for that. But the 2 statistics on there that I found most interesting and probably relevant for this topic is the number of municipalities. And it was mentioned already in probably both conversation that Tim was having and what Victoria talked about is we have all these municipalities. And we have 52 of them in Lycoming County, and Erie has 38, which is quite a few for the landmass and the size that you are. And our median household incomes is very similar when, again, U.S. Census data, which I debate all the time. 48,000 by U.S. Census for Lycoming County and 47 for Erie. The Lycoming County Water and Sewer Authority was formed back in 1989 before it was common to be talking about regional or shared services. The county commissioners had the foresight to create the authority because there was a need to site a sewage treatment plant in a borough located in Lycoming County. At the time, that borough, we had already hit the era where you couldn't site a sewage treatment plant in the floodplain, flood fringe, floodway, and this particular borough was located right along the west branch of the Susquehanna River and Loyalsaw Creek, so there was really no feasible location for the sewage treatment plant to be sited within that borough. So when the discussion became siting the sewage treatment plant in the neighboring township, it really brought the Hatfields and McCoys together, and somebody really needed to step in to bring leadership. And in this area, it was also considered a growth corridor by the county planning department. So it really became an issue that begged for leadership and direction. And the county commissioners made that decision to create an authority to break down the municipal barriers and create an independent operating authority similar to what you have here in your communities. The name that we have, Lycoming County Water and Sewer Authority, is something that we often debate. It brings about a stigma about the county or Big Brother coming in and taking something over, and that's not really the case. But it is a hurdle sometimes that we have to overcome. The other issue is people think because we have Lycoming County in our name, we're a department of the county and we get money from the county commissioners. We do not. We get no general tax revenue from the county. All the revenue that we receive is received through user fees that we charge our customers or for services that we bill out that we provide to communities. So we get no extra money because the county created us. And after the formation of the authority, the county commissioner's sole function or their role for our authority is to appoint board members to Lycoming County Water and Sewer Authority's board. Those board members have to live or work anywhere in Lycoming County. They're not bound by a service territory where we provide services. Thank goodness I don't know how many board members that we would have with the number of services that we provide today. But 9 board members anywhere in Lycoming County. And what is important about that is our board members are critical to our mission because we're focused on solutions. We're not an organization that's wrought with small, petty political issues. We need people that have certain skill sets. It can be contractual issues. It can be municipal government. We've had school teachers on our board, people that are just engaged in the conversation about the necessary services that we provide. We focus on big picture issues, so there really isn't time for us to worry about politics. We do take political interests into account in making the decisions, but our interests are really regulatory and compliance driven and based on a community need. In our original incorporation documents back in 1989, again, really having the foresight at the time to put everything but the kitchen sink into our incorporation documents. So if it had to do with water and sewer, the commissioners wanted to make sure that it was included in what we were able to task to accomplish. So you see on there words like planning, creation, operation, funding, maintenance, they're all included. And again, created because we needed leadership and we didn't want to be sandwiched into a very small set of objectives. We were first created and had our first operating system in Lycoming County. Again, this is a map of Lycoming County. If you recall the first map I put up, the west branch of the Susquehanna River meanders through the southern portion of Lycoming County. That's where the bulk of our population is. Most people, even today, still think of us as having our core operation in the oval that's on the map. However, serving without municipal boundaries, today we service all these locations where you see these stars on the map. And those stars represent locations that we have regular routine business in. And in most cases, that's 365. We do business where we have water and sewer facilities, which means it's a 7-day-a-week operation, and we're there on a daily basis. When you think about Lycoming County, think about the state of Rhode Island. Our land mass is larger than the state of Rhode Island. So we're putting over 100,000 miles on our fleet vehicles every year just for our basic operations. One thing we're not viewed as in Lycoming County is the least expensive. People don't call us because they want a cheaper option. And I say that because nobody calls us to help on those stars or those locations on the map if they're fiscally sound and they're well run and they're well managed. they wouldn't need to call us, right? So they're calling us because there's a crisis or something has happened, a tipping point that has caused them to need some assistance. So it doesn't matter so much of what you see on there, but we have systems that we own. The words don't mean as much as we have 4 sewer systems and 3 water systems that we own. 3 of those we developed from beginning to current day. 4 of those systems we acquired as private systems. Of those 4 systems, 3 were regulated by the Pennsylvania Utility Commission and 1 was a private authority. Besides systems that we own, we have contracted services. And in those contracted services, we have what we consider our cafeteria-style plan of services that we provide. One of the things that we recognize is communities might need help, but they don't want to lose control. And in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, we all know that to be true with the number of municipalities that we have and the control issues that we see across the Commonwealth. It's not unique to Lycoming County, it's not unique to Erie County, it's across the Commonwealth and we see it all the time. So what we do is we offer services based on our core capabilities. Sometimes people call us and we are not able to provide a service that they need, but we help them to figure out the solution. So we bridge the gap. Somebody had mentioned earlier in one of the talks that maybe they need an engineer to come in and help them do certain things or perform certain tasks, or they don't have the capability within their own organizations to figure out what the right solution is. In our case, we're an organization, we always say, think of us, give us a call, and we can help direct you to the right people, even if we're not the agency that can do that. But the contracted services that we provide means that they're systems that we don't own. And the types of business that we do in the contracted services world can include basic operation and maintenance, full operation and maintenance management, sewer or water billing and delinquent collections, kind of everybody's favorite that doesn't get done really well when you have to collect money from your neighbor, your relatives, and then have to shut off water service or file liens and go the whole way to sheriff sales. Some people like to have that step between them and their neighbor in collecting money for services provided. And then we provide administrative and technical support. The administrative technical support that comes and goes, it depends on what a community needs. But the operation maintenance and now stormwater management and assistance and the sewer and water billing is core to our business, and it's regular and has been routine for over 6 or 7 years now in some of those communities. Again, the words don't mean so much on this map, but I want you to look at the numbers for the communities that we serve. What those numbers represent are number of customers per the systems that we operate or we own. So 3,300 customers, that sounds pretty good, right? 34 customers on a small sewage system that we acquired last January. 34 customers that have to bear all of the cost associated with the assets and the operation of those facilities. If you don't manage your assets, when you only have 34 customers in the system, they will not be able to afford the service when a crisis happens. If a pump fails, if the roof needs replaced, if a new compliance requirement comes into play. So you have to be managing when you only have a small customer base. So 34 customers, 90 customers, 53 customers, those are some of our greatest challenges. And the 96 customers and the 34 customers and the 272 customers, those are systems that we acquired. That means when we got those systems, they were in disarray. They were in disrepair. We do all this with 22 employees, and they're non-union. Thank goodness they're non-union because we have to be very flexible and adaptable in our business model. Our business model is very, very different than most water and sewer service providers. Our business model sort of crosses over from the typical utility or water and sewer authority to private industry type, except we're an authority, so we still fall under the same rules under the Pennsylvania Municipal Authorities Act. We have 6 management team and the rest are hourly employees, and one of our management team members is a part-time engineer. Thankfully, he's on our staff because otherwise I would go to an awful lot of night meetings. And we really struggle to manage our night meeting schedules when we have a lot of projects ongoing. For the people that are financial in this room, there are some numbers that might have some meaning to you as well. From a property, plant, and equipment standpoint, we have a value of $50 million. We have combined debt of $36 million, which means our net position is $17 million. That's not very large in the world of water and sewer. Assets and infrastructure in this world are very expensive, so most utilities have much, much larger balance sheets than this. And our annual budget is usually somewhere around $5 million. For 2018, it's $4.8 million. So we're really small, but we're viewed as a very large resource in Lycoming County because there aren't a lot of people that folks can just pick up the phone and call and ask questions to. Why is a resource needed? We heard about it all session so far. There's more regulations. It's very technical and complex. It's very, very confusing, especially for those smaller systems that we serve. And even 3,300 customers is a small system. I mean, let's face it, everything that we're doing in Lycoming County is really small. The greater Williamsport region would be the largest customer base. Everybody else is small. So for us, we're a resource to the part-time secretary that's in the office and receives a letter from DEP. We're a resource to county planning that gets a phone call from somebody that doesn't understand what to do next. But the burdens that is placed upon our municipal officials, where it used to be feasible and practical for a public works employee to plow snow and mow grass and be a water treatment plant operator or sewage operator, is just not a reality of today. And that's a burden that we're faced with and something that we owe to our community to begin to manage. These are facilities that we can't ignore just because the infrastructure is in the ground and it's operating. It is something that we need to look at from an affordability standpoint, from a sustainability standpoint, to assure that we can provide the service that every day when you turn your tap on, water's going to come out, and when you flush the toilet, it's going to go somewhere and be properly treated. But I always want to make sure that people remember if we don't provide this service, it has an impact for economic development, for the health and well-being of our community, not just public safety. So again, when we created the original authority back in 1989, it included everything under the sun, but it did not include stormwater. Stormwater was allowed under the Pennsylvania Municipal Authorities Act several years ago, and we had to work with the county commissioners to be able to incorporate that into our organization. Sometimes we ask, why did we do that? It was really based on a need that we saw in the communities that we were serving. These MS4 requirements for stormwater regulations were extremely burdensome, they were very confusing, and they were very expensive, and municipal officials needed some assistance. So we wanted to make sure that we included that in our mission. Why did we do that? We did that because our mission is very unique. We recognize that we're an integral part to Lycoming County, to the municipal partners that we currently serve, or some future partners that we may need to serve. And we ask the question, how can we help? And we do this every year as part of a strategic planning, as a part of routine strategic planning that we do with our budget. In our mission, again, pulling all of those words in there, it's not as important what the words say, to include water, stormwater, and wastewater as a support. But one of the things that's key to our mission is that we offer our services in response to requests. So we are not the entity that's going to come in and dictate and mandate what you need to do. We are a resource, but you have to call us. In our strategic planning, that line at the very bottom has been debated. It's been debated because folks have said, do you think you should be more assertive? Some people have said aggressive, and that doesn't capture the essence of our organization. But they said, should you be more assertive because people need help? But if we're more assertive, people will turn away faster. So we've been building our credibility and building our reputation, and we go out into the community, and somebody back there asked the question, somebody needs to be talking to these people about it. As part of our strategic planning and our goals and objectives, that includes going to township association meetings and borough association meetings, going to township meetings at night, going to different forums so people get name recognition and understand who we are and what we do. But again, as part of the strategic planning that we do, we have found it important as an organization to leave that statement in response to requests for assistance in our mission statement. I think that might change as time goes by because of the critical nature of what we're seeing and what we're dealing with in Lycoming County and across the Commonwealth and across the country. When we look at our strategic plan, we look at how can we utilize our services through the core business that we provide to pool our resources and offer our assistance. We do that because it's technical and complex, as I mentioned earlier, but we feel we need to do it and offer the services because most people that are responsible for running these smaller rural utilities are not familiar with running a business from a risk management standpoint. They don't think about managing their facilities from a money management standpoint. Think about some of the local authorities you might be familiar with. It may be difficult to find people to be appointed to that authority. It may be a matter of convenience that they knew a municipal official that asked them to serve and they couldn't say no. It could be that they're retired and they had the most time on their hands to go to a night meeting. It may not be that they're appointed to that authority because they understand the utility world. And that's a struggle that we have in terms of educating and making sure people understand that what we're talking about is a business that's very complex and warrants a business strategy and risk management and money management to be core to the decision making. Because the authority members should be the decision makers. The councilmen and women should be decision makers. But sometimes these decisions are too difficult for people to make. And we see it time and time again. We usually don't get called until there's a crisis, until it's too expensive, and they don't want to be the ones to raise the rate high. You take it, you do it. I don't want to deal with this anymore. It's sometimes when we get called in. Sometimes we get called in because DEP may have referred us, county planning may have referred us, another township official might have said, oh, I heard you're dealing with this, you should call Christine, you should call the authority. Most of our referrals are by word of mouth. And in our strategic plan, we're now trying to build upon that and have more outreach and communication with some of our future stakeholders and our future partners. So strategic planning is very important for an organization like ours because we don't own all those systems. So somebody can say, well, we don't want to use your services anymore. Or somebody might say, you know, we decided to hire somebody to do this work now. And that happens from time to time. And it's caused us to go from 27 employees down to 22 employees. And going through a downsizing in a utility is not normal. It's not pleasant, and our organization is very small, it's very family-like, and we rely on one another. So our board has taken very seriously personnel planning, financial planning, capital improvement planning, and strategic planning as a package, as part of our financial package each year in our budget. Because we can't do that. It's not like we have 3,000 customers and we're going to charge X number of dollars and we're guaranteed to get that revenue. That may be true for the owned systems that we had on the left side of that chart, but for contracted services, that work could go away. So what we do in the structure of our organization isn't for everybody. It is a very dicey kind of work that our board members, they set policy. Not every authority member is comfortable with that. And I meet with potential authority members and sometimes they say, this isn't for me. Utility's not my thing. Water and wastewater's not my thing. Those aren't the kind of decisions I want to be making. It's amazing. It is very, very difficult to find the right board member to sit on any authority. But when you ask them to make these types of decisions, it becomes even more difficult. So strategic planning is important for us because it pulls those 4 things into our budget. But in addition, it helps us to recognize and our board members to recognize that what we do really does dovetail with county comprehensive planning. It dovetails with multi-municipal planning. It dovetails with zoning ordinances and sewage facilities planning. So when we look at what we do, we really are integral to the municipality and to the county. And we need to have those conversations about what those needs are and how we can help. And we look at, during the strategic planning and the budget process, who are our partners today and what do they need, and who do we anticipate our partners to be in the future. And the reason we need to be having the conversation is because you would think intuitively that clean water infrastructure is all we would be talking about during our budget process, during our strategic planning process. But that is not the case. Yes, we talk about our infrastructure. Yes, we talk about regulations. Yes, we talk about public health and safety. Yes, we talk about affordability. But we are always talking about economic development. We are always talking about job retention. We need to begin the conversation or continue the conversation if you're already talking with the Chamber of Commerce. You need to continue that conversation with the business and industry that are in your community. There are various forums that you can use. It's, the word networking, I just think, oh my gosh, I got to go to another meeting. I don't have time for that. I have all this work to do. But networking is extremely important for me in the role of executive director because that's where I'm making contacts. That's where I'm able to evangelize this topic of clean water infrastructure and affordability and asset management. There are a lot of stakeholders and there are a lot of partners that need to be involved in this conversation. And we're looking for them. Who are they? Where do we find the leaders? And why should they care? And what I'll tell you is it depends on our issue. Some of our issues are very, 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 very isolated. I feel like I'm going to take it was kind of small. Maybe you can hear me if I talk over it.
No, just turn it off. Just turn it off.
Did you turn it off?
I did not.
I think it turned off.
Okay.
Well, if you can still hear me.
Oh, yeah.
Must be the batteries.
No.
Okay, we're done. So leaders, again, who are they and where will we find them? It depends on us, on the star on that map. Some of the stars on the map warrant a smaller group of stakeholders. Some of the stars on the map are very specific to an issue or a need. But the stakeholders we need to find, we need to educate them as to why they should care about the issues that we're dealing with here today. And they should care because our industry is in fact in a crisis. I don't need to get into the statistics, everybody else has already talked about them, but there's not enough money and there's not enough people and the infrastructure is failing and in some cases it may be needed. And this is an industry issue, not Erie County or Lycoming County or Pennsylvania or the Great Lakes region, but across the country. So when we start looking at asset management, most people say asset management is the facilities, it's the pipes. For us, it's about money management, but it's also about people and time management. Because for us, we're doing all of this work at 15 different stars on a map, and we only have 22 people. There's only so much time in the day, and there's only so much that the people can do. I can't have them on one end of the county doing a project and be needed on the other end of the county doing the project at the same time. So again, intuitively, we're doing asset management because we we're managing a project on one end of the county in 2017, and right now we're planning for another project in 2019 in another area. And we're planning for another project on a different star on that map, trying to seek funding. And if we don't get that funding by 2020, it's not a crisis yet. I can still try to find another funding pool, and maybe I can do that project in 2022. If I can't find the money by 2024, we're going to have to do it with a rate increase. But we're doing that in a staged, staggered manner out of necessity. And people really need to think about how much can you truly accomplish with the people that you have. It is very overwhelming to do capital projects. So if we start thinking about how much time and how much resource it takes from people to do that, we need to make sure we plan appropriately. There was one thing that the joint action, there were a lot of things, but one thing I wanted to key in on in this presentation that was cited in the joint action plan. And it cites the lack of financial resources, long-term planning strategies, and political will. That's my 50 hours a week at the authority. And that's what I lose sleep over for another 10 hours a week. These are the struggles that we have in Lycoming County. And we think about who's going to advocate asset management if there's no political will. We put this infrastructure in the ground in the early 1900s. Primary wastewater treatment in the 50s. In the early 1970s, man, we were going gangbusters because there was money on the table. We're not the ones that have had to do that. We don't have an advocate today because we're not carrying water from the well into the house to do our dishes or take a bath. We're not carrying water into the house and having to heat it on the stove to take a warm bath. We're not walking out to the privy in 3 feet of snow. No. Who are our advocates? Who are the people that really appreciate the services that we provide? This is what we see today. The modern conveniences. We see them in our bathrooms. We see them in our kitchens. Think about the home that was built in 1950 and how many times you change the fixtures in your kitchen or your bathroom. Well, we haven't done that with our water infrastructure. So what we see above ground might look beautiful and the service might still work. But below the ground, the infrastructure is aging and it's largely been ignored. Again, there's no statistics there that I need to share that haven't already been shared, but we take what we have at the faucet, at the tub, at the toilet, at the washing machine, all for granted. So if we want to talk about affordability, a whole nother separate topic that I'd love to come back and talk about. If we want to talk about affordability, the only way we can do that is people appreciate the service that we provide, and if they understand what it takes to provide it. Because they don't. Most people today don't know who provides their water service or when they flush their toilet where their sanitary sewer goes in Lycoming County. One, because it's too confusing. There's too many service providers. But two, because they don't have to. They just pay a bill. And if the bill's not too expensive, they really don't care. But there's no quick fix to the aging infrastructure that we're struggling with. So the authority, the Lycoming County Water and Sewer Authority, has really 4 main goals that we employ when we go out to a community and we do outreach. 1, our objective is to develop cost-effective solutions. Notice it doesn't say low-cost solutions. It doesn't say low-cost alternatives. It says cost-effective solutions that has a key in long-term planning. We want to make sure that we're planning and preparing for the future, and in that we're sustainable long-term and that we're accountable. We need to be accountable to our customers, to the township or the municipal official, to the county, to our board, and to our employees. Because even our employees need to buy into this. They need to speak to the customers on a regular basis. They need to understand too why our costs are so high. And while we're doing all this, yes, we're building infrastructure, but we're really building partnerships and relationships with the people that we serve, the municipal officials, even the customer that we're serving. we need to be accountable for, and we need to build that relationship with them. And the key for us is to honor the community's character and request. This is where I say we don't want to change that statement in our mission statement that we serve upon request, because we don't dictate or mandate. There are some communities that have a very unique character, and there are some communities that local control will not be given up. And if you can understand that and are still able to help those municipal officials through these complex regulatory requirements and these very expensive infrastructure issues, then you're succeeding with something. But every community's need is different. And that's where we try to be successful, in understanding their needs and accomplishing their goals while achieving environmental compliance. There are statistics out there all over. I mean, there may be differences in communities, but they're really all the same. And there's many periodicals you can read and studies you can read. This one happens to be from January of 2017 from the Small Drinking Water Research from EPA. There are so many issues on there that dovetail again with the Joint Action Plan, that dovetail what we see in our communities, that probably carry over into what you see in your communities. And extreme topography and weather conditions, as well as geographic isolation or remoteness, are issues that we struggle with in Lycoming County, because we are so spread out and there are so few customers in those areas that we serve. As many as people like to complain about regulations and the growing requirements for regulations, there is a need for it. There is a need for oversight. There is a need for asset management to be talked about and asked by the regulators, not only by the operator that they see at the sewage treatment plant, but by the officials, by the owners, because the operator is just the operator. Now, I don't know how well you can see the picture that's up there, but the solution begins with asset management, not by ignoring the problem. It begins with a business strategy or a risk management strategy, because if we ignore our assets, this is what you end up with. I don't know, again, how well you can see it, but this is a sewage treatment plant from 2007 that the Department of Environmental Protection ordered the township to take over. Not a consent order, but ordered the township to take it over. This is a treatment tank that the department gave 9 months for that township to replace because it was near catastrophic failure. This sewage treatment plant was installed somewhere in the mid-'80s, and $0 were invested back into the system. You can see it. There's rebar right here. I could have taken my pencil or a twig and poked through that, and water would have come shooting out. This was a crisis. This is why you need regulatory oversight. That system today, and I know these pictures are dark, so I don't know how well you can see it, but the supervisors replaced these tanks with these tanks. They put additional buildings in, and then unfortunately in 2011 a flood came and flooded their treatment building, and we were able to help them get FEMA funding to replace the entire control building. I'd like to say this is a success story, but the monthly sewer rate for a house in this community is $161 a month. When you don't manage your asset, that's what you get. $161 a month. Is it affordable? It's not probably affordable, but it's the reality. I don't want to talk about that one because it's wrought with a lot of issues. I'd rather talk about a different case study. Again, we're not the least expensive alternative, but in Limestone Township, which is a small water system that serves an agricultural community in the southwestern portion of Lycoming County, they had a water association from the 1950s that had some serious compliance issues in the 80s that were dealt with. They were dealt with. Water filtration of the surface water rules came into play in the mid-90s, and they were forced to put in filtration for their systems. So they created a local authority. Not a bad idea. They were able to get some funding to deal with the filtration requirements. They formed the authority, they assigned community members to the board, they built the filtration system, and they were able to operate for a while, and it was okay at first. But they had some long-term problems. They never really addressed the issues from the 80s and the 90s, and they never invested back into their filtration or their treatment system. The authority was called in 2011 by the township supervisors, not by the local authority. The local authority really didn't want to have anything to do with us. They wanted the local control. The township supervisors recognized that there was an issue. There were compliance issues, there were complaints by the community members, and there was unreliable service. For 3 days, people in the summer of 2011 turned on their taps and were unable to get water out of their taps because the local authority members thought there was a problem with their water storage tank and they took it out of service. They never told their customers, they never told DEP, and they were absolutely certain that they needed to do this work at that time. So again, there was a crisis because in 2011, you expect to wake up in the morning and turn your tap and have water come out. And for 3 straight days, they had no water. So the regulatory issues were obviously significant at that point. They had no water at the taps. The township supervisors were becoming involved because the volunteers were making decisions and they were also having a hard time placing members on the authority. People would get placed on the authority and they would step back off because it was not a healthy environment. There were definitely control issues there. And for this community, it's primarily residential, but they had some agricultural customers as well. And in the time period from 2010 to 2013, they were using 180,000 gallons per day. There was about, just to use rough numbers, about 250 customers on the system, a couple of agricultural, and they were using 180,000 gallons a day. That's 750 gallons per day per customer. Over 750. That is a lot. I like to work in round numbers, so today what we typically see is somewhere around 100 gallons per day. We use it as a round number. It can be 100, 105, 120. It's surely not 750. That's a serious compliance issue. The bigger issues, however, were really management and regulatory compliance. The questions the supervisors wanted to know, is it a lack of understanding, or is it ignorance, or is it flat out defiance that the leaders of this local authority were willing to do that, were willing to make these decisions? So although they were exceeding issues, they were exceeding the allocation permits and they had DEP violations, what was really happening is the customers were suffering and rate increases were beginning without a plan and without any control. We became involved in really, for guidance and education and financial planning, we were talking as loud as we could to the township supervisors. And what we needed to do is get our hands on the distribution system because the authority members were still dealing with the distribution system. And there were a significant number of leaks in the system that were causing us to have to respond in an emergency every time there was a problem at the treatment plant. And that just caused rising costs. So to avoid that, once we got we were turned over the ability to manage the system in the distribution system, we fixed 5 service line leaks and we dropped that usage down to 50,000 gallons per day. That's about 200 gallons per customer instead. Now we still have issues. After we started full management in 2013, we still had issues with leak detection. It is limestone township, so the water doesn't surface there. It is a real challenge, but we got full control of that. In doing so, the township was insisting on the transfer, but we had asked that that transfer not occur. There were some regulatory implications involving the Susquehanna River Basin that over 100,000 gallons of usage would have pulled those regulations into the authority and cost that system about another $500,000 over a period of 3 or 4 years. And the system really couldn't afford it. So through this process of regulatory understanding and credibility, we were building trust with the community, We were spending a lot of time developing those relationships, but we were making decisions and making sure those decisions were transparent, and we were communicating that not only to the township officials, but to the customers. Since then, there's been no rate increase by Lycoming County Water and Sewer Authority, but we do continue to look at that metrics of daily water usage. That's lost revenue. If you don't understand what you have, you can't manage it. So the local authority was unable to comprehend how much money they were losing by producing 180,000 gallons when they only needed to produce 50. This presentation will be available to you through email or online, so you'll be able to see these statistics a little bit better. But you'll see here that Limestone Water in Lycoming County, they pay $194 a quarter for the equivalent of 12,000 gallons with a 5/8 inch meter. $194 a quarter for water only. I'll skip this slide in the interest of time. Again, there's a success story in Limestone Water because we saved significant cost and avoided some regulations that would have cost them a lot of money. And we transitioned the system from reactive to proactive. There's still a lot of work to be done. These are periodicals that were laying on my desk yesterday. I show them to you because pick your periodicals up and read them. There's valuable information in them. Share them with people that you know. Drop that magazine on somebody else's desk that you want to get engaged in this conversation. Flag that page so that they know. There's a lot of resources out there for asset management. There's a resource presentation that EPA did back in 2016 that I find to be very valuable. Again, speaking about the transition from reactive to a proactive work environment, because our business environment really is changing. And what's happened in the life cycle of our infrastructure is we're very, very good at operating and maintaining. We're not very good, however, at renewing. We want to stop that cycle there. Most people know to go buy more toilet paper and fill the toilet paper roll, but they may not know how to change the toilet and the toilet bowl ring. So they don't want to deal with it. Those are the issues that we're faced with, is that we're operating and expensively maintaining outdated and outlived equipment. So as we transition, this is what we're talking about. This is what folks have already talked about before me. There are 5 core questions associated with asset management. And the first place you have to start is question number 1. What is the current state of my asset? What do I own and where is it at? What condition is it in? Those are questions that you cannot move to question 4 through 5 if you cannot ask question number 1. Now there's a lot of words on that slide and it can be extremely overwhelming. So when we go into a system, we try not to make it too hard. We want to know, tell us what you know, what do your operators know, what are your problem areas, and give me your financial audit. Because in a lot of cases, your assets and your depreciation table can speak volumes in terms of what you have in the ground that maybe you don't even know about or don't understand. Regulatory implications, which somebody talked about, has to be included in that conversation. And then we try to identify needs if we were to move forward and help a community. And what we need to do is educate stakeholders. I'm almost done. Because the cost is going to go up. If we become involved, there's a reason we're becoming involved, and everybody needs to understand that the cost will go up. So communication is essential. So we need to make sure that the customers, the municipal officials understand that we are adding value to people's lives, to the business community, to the industry down the street. And this education and communication effort is worth our time. Affordability is very subjective. As I mentioned, a sewer-only rate of $161 a month is extremely high. But we have another sewer system where the rate is currently $120 a month for sewer only. And that rate needs to be $135. That is what that will cost that system. Those customers understand it, and they voted as a homeowners association to turn the system over to us, even though they knew the reality of those costs. They recognized what it costs to operate the sewage system in their community. Very, very quickly, I want to touch on political will, leaving you with this thought of this decision-making process is so difficult that I believe political will has a lot to do with 5 stages of grief. We get caught so much in this cycle of denial and anger and bargaining. And then sometimes before we know it, the municipal officials change and we start all over again. And we can't make that decision. Maybe we're stuck in that cycle, or maybe we have to wait for this crisis to occur. But we're in here to help people beyond this into acceptance and help them to better be able to manage it. This is the affordability issue that I just need somebody to tell me before Tim or Marty post this that I did the math correctly for Erie. When I looked at the numbers for Erie, I came up with a number of $138 a quarter for water and sewer. My gut tells me that's really low, so before this gets posted, I just need to know that that number is accurate. In our system, $273 where we provide sewer and the borough provides water, $369 a quarter where we have both water and sewer facilities. $445 a quarter where we have sewer and another location has water. I mean, those numbers on this side, except for this 483, we believe all of these numbers are affordable. Because we understand what it takes to manage those assets. We don't even yet have a full asset management plan for the smaller systems because we're seeking funding. We're developing the plan to seek funding. So this is a challenge that we're faced with. Like I said, before Marty or Tim post this, I just want to make sure that that number is correct. The largest system in Lycoming County is Williamsport, and even those numbers are significantly higher. So I would ask that you take a look at those numbers and think about maybe the next topic, affordability. So thank you for your time today. We believe we're succeeding in our mission. I'd love to share more stories with you. We're struggling ahead of our industry. If there's anything we can do to help you consider this kind of model for your community, don't hesitate to reach out to us.
All right, thank you, Christine.